Can Europe survive itself? The existential crisis of the European Union explained. A continent at a crossroads. Europe once stood at the center of the world. It gave us democracy and dictatorship, enlightenment and empire, science and slaughter. From Athens to Rome, from Paris to Berlin, Europe shaped modern civilization. And after the ashes of World War II, something unprecedented emerged. A bold experiment to bind former enemies together, economically, politically, and morally, so that war would never return. That experiment became the European Union. But today, that experiment is under strain like never before. Economic stagnation, demographic collapse, mass migration, energy insecurity, political fragmentation, rising nationalism, declining global influence. And beneath it all, a deeper, more uncomfortable question is emerging. Can Europe survive itself? Not external enemies, not Russia, not China, not the United States, but its own internal contradictions. In this documentary, we will explore the existential crisis of the European Union, how it was built, why it worked, why it's now faltering, and whether Europe's future is reform, fragmentation, or quiet decline. This is not a pro-EU or anti-EU argument. This is a reality check. Why the European Union was created. To understand the crisis, we must understand the origin. Europe in 1945 was broken. 2 world wars in 30 years had killed tens of millions. France and Germany, historic enemies, had fought 3 wars in 70 years. The lesson was brutally clear. National rivalries in Europe led to mass death. The solution was radical for its time: economic integration. If nations depended on each other for coal, steel, trade, and prosperity, war would become irrational. This led to the European Coal and Steel Community, and later, the European Economic Community. Over time, integration deepened: shared markets, shared laws, shared institutions, and eventually, a shared currency. The idea wasn't just economic efficiency, it was political peace through economic dependence. For decades, it worked. The euro, a masterpiece or a fatal flaw? Nothing defines the modern EU more than the euro. The Eurozone brought together vastly different economies under one currency. Germany, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, one interest rate, one monetary policy, radically different productivity levels. This worked only when money was cheap and growth was strong. But the euro has a fundamental flaw. Countries cannot devalue their own currency. Before the euro, struggling economies could regain competitiveness by weakening their currency. After the euro, they were trapped. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, this flaw exploded. Greece nearly collapsed. Italy stagnated. Spain suffered mass unemployment. And the response? Austerity. Imposed not by voters, but by institutions like the European Central Bank and the European Commission. For millions of Europeans, the EU stopped feeling like a protector and started feeling like a disciplinarian. Democracy versus technocracy. One of the EU's deepest contradictions is this: it is democratic in theory, but technocratic in practice. Voters elect national governments, but major decisions are made in Brussels, Frankfurt, and Luxembourg. Institutions most citizens cannot name. Officials most people never voted for. This creates a democratic gap. When policies succeed, leaders claim credit. When policies fail, blame is deflected to Brussels. This fuels resentment. People begin to feel ruled, not represented. And into that gap step populist movements on the left and the right, claiming to take back control. Brexit, the crack in the dam. In 2016, something unthinkable happened. A major EU member voted to leave. The Brexit was not just a British story, it was a European shockwave. For the first time, the EU was no longer irreversible. The official EU response was firm: leaving must be costly, no cherry-picking, no benefits without obligations. The message was clear: don't try this again. But Brexit revealed something deeper, that the EU's legitimacy depends on perceived benefit. When citizens feel prosperity, they tolerate complexity. When living standards fall, tolerance evaporates. Migration and the cultural fault line. Few issues divide Europe more than migration. The 2015 migrant crisis exposed the EU's inability to act as a unified political entity. Some countries welcomed migrants, others rejected quotas outright. Eastern Europe resisted cultural change. Western Europe emphasized humanitarian duty. This wasn't just policy disagreement, it was a civilizational disagreement. What is Europe? A market, a set of values, a cultural identity, or simply a legal framework? The EU has never fully answered this, and unresolved identity questions always return as political crises. Demographic collapse, Europe's silent crisis. Europe is aging, rapidly. Falling birth rates mean fewer workers, more pensioners, rising welfare costs, slower growth. Without immigration, many economies simply don't function. But with immigration comes social tension. This creates a vicious circle. Low fertility equals migration. Migration equals political backlash. Backlash equals instability. Instability equals lower fertility. This is not a short-term issue. It is a civilizational math problem, and math always wins. Energy, industry, and strategic decline. Europe once powered the world. Today, it depends on imported energy, foreign supply chains, external military protection. The energy crisis following geopolitical shocks exposed just how fragile Europe's industrial base has become. High energy costs push factories abroad. Green policies raise costs faster than alternatives scale. The result? Deindustrialisation. Meanwhile, the US subsidizes domestic industry. China plans decades ahead. Europe debates regulations. Power doesn't disappear, it relocates. A multipolar world and Europe's place in it. The global order is changing. The US remains dominant but strained. China is rising but unstable. The global south is asserting independence. And Europe? Europe is rich but slow, educated but divided, moral but hesitant. In a multipolar world, influence belongs to states that act fast, systems that reward productivity, nations that can project power. The EU struggles with all three. Can Europe reform itself? There are three possible futures: deeper integration, a true fiscal union, shared debt, shared taxation, shared defense. This requires surrendering sovereignty, politically explosive, fragmentation, more opt-outs, two-speed Europe, core versus periphery, stable in the short term, dangerous long term, managed decline, no collapse, no reform, just gradual loss of relevance. History suggests this is the most likely path. Conclusion. The question, Europe cannot escape. The European Union was built to prevent war, and in that, it succeeded. But the challenges of the 21st century are not tanks and trenches. They are demographics, economics, identity, energy, technology. Europe's greatest threat is not invasion, it is inertia. Can Europe survive itself? The answer depends on whether it can confront uncomfortable truths, reform its institutions, and redefine its purpose before history makes the decision for it. Because history is patient, but it is never forgiving. If you like this content, like and subscribe. Stay aware. Stay awake. This is Felix. See you next time.